What's up, folks? We're back, finally, and today we are talking about why strength training is the most important thing an athlete can do for their performance. Well, today we're actually not going to talk about that because it isn't quite true. What's up? We are back. Actually already made this video, but I felt it was too long and rambly and didn't get straight to the point or right to the point, so I'm remaking it. Here we are. So I want to talk about why strength training isn't quite as important as we might think it is in regards to athletic performance. So typically as strength and conditioning coaches, we've kind of been sold and been indoctrinated to this reductive strength training trumps all, and there's no downside to strength training. But I want to point out why that might not necessarily be the case. So when we talk about heavy amounts of strength training, like a lot of muscular hypertrophy work, or just your typical general strength training with the barbell and dumbbells to promote force production and to promote muscular hypertrophy, when we are talking about strength training in that way, what we're talking about is high amounts of concentric muscular activity and kind of global compressive strategies like you need to barbell back squat. You need a reduction in motion through the entire system to create more force into the floor, into the bar, and to lift more weight. If you don't have that, if you start to move, you're not going to be able to lift quite as much weight. So, hey, by the way, brought to you by Cold Brew by Quills Coffee. All right, bro, you have to get down. So when we have high amounts of concentric muscular activity or compressed muscles, what we're talking about is there's no space to move into that portion of the body. So if I take a group of muscles and I compress them, very concentric muscular contraction, what I'm doing is reducing space for anything to move into it. And that might not be super beneficial for athletes that need kind of increased motion, like a pitcher. Pitchers get their arm way back here. The lower arm is basically parallel to the ground, rotated back this way, sometimes even more, to create a very fast whip-like motion to create a lot of velocity into the ball to throw 90-plus-mile-an-hour fastballs. Now, if we strength train pitchers all day, every day, 3 times on Sunday, and create high amounts of a global compressive strategy, high amounts of concentric muscular activity, they're no longer going to be able to get into that crazy arm slot position to create 90-plus-mile-an-hour fastballs. Now, each demands for every sport is different, so we have to take into account that when we are programming for athletes and training athletes. So an offensive lineman might need heavy strength training work, high amounts of muscular hypertrophy, high amounts of concentric muscle activity, because they don't want motion, they don't want to be able to move, because if they move and get turned, there's a D lineman on the other side of them sacking the quarterback. So we have to take into account the demands of each sport. But that's just a quick example of why super heavy amounts of strength training might not be beneficial for most athletes. And a lot of field sports, just sports in general, there's a lot of change in direction involved. There's a lot of explosive activity, high amounts of speed. And to be able to create this fast change of direction or high amounts of speed when sprinting, we need access to certain positions that if we have too high amounts of concentric muscle activity, we're not going to be able to hit those positions. Just for an example, if linebacker going to stop and change directions to get to the ball carrier, if he can't be able to hit certain positions at the hip and up throughout the system to change direction, he's going to keep moving that way rather than being able to stop and plant the other direction really fast. I already mentioned the example with the pitcher as well. So we need access some sport, obviously the demands of every sport are different, but we need access to certain positions if we want to create the high amounts of velocity that we need, or change of directions that we need, and speed that we need in certain sports. We need access to certain positions that heavy amounts of barbell strength training aren't going to give us. They're going to actually restrict. Also, when it comes to athletic performance, specificity is key. So if you really want to get better at your sport or at a specific position in your sport, you have to do that sport more, and you have to master the skills involved in that sport. Now again, every sport is different, but you have to master the skills. Strength training isn't going to do that for you. Specificity of those skills is key. I know so many people have seen the video of LeBron James squatting. He is a god-awful squatter. I don't even know why. If I was his strength coach, I wouldn't even have him squatting. If I was his strength coach, I would basically be like, bro, we gotta just make sure you can not get injured and stay in the sport as long as you need, and just continue to let you use your genetic abilities you were born with and all the skills, the mastery of basketball specific skills that you've acquired over the years. We just got to let you continue to do that. So specificity is key. Strength training isn't going to trump that any day of the week. So you want to get better at a sport, practice that sport as much as you can, master the skills involved in that sport. Tom Brady, another perfect example. So I know so far I've been beating the drum that strength training is bad, but it's not bad. It can be beneficial if we use it right and in the right doses. So knowing when to reduce the barbell strength training involved with a baseball pitcher, knowing other better exercises to give a pitcher where they can learn to create high force and high velocity in the right positions that aren't going to create an adaptation that is not beneficial to the sport. Again, a specific example of the pitcher is the crazy arm slot position. And this is just involved in whatever sport there is. So we have to understand that there are very different demands for every sport, and we will never really know what impact we have on an athlete's performance. We can guess, we can make the best educated guesses, and we can test as much as we can to see what works and what doesn't, but at the end of the day, there's this huge realm of uncertainty and complexity that we will never truly know for certain or absolutely what X happens in the weight room, therefore B happens on the field. We will just never know that. So we have to embrace this uncertainty and complexity and know that we're never going to be sure what fully works and what doesn't. So we have to kind of err on the safe side and not the sorry side, because the last thing we want to do is hinder an athlete's performance or potentially get them injured, or just not create unneeded aches and pains where they can't practice and excel at their sport to their full potential because we just created a negative secondary consequence in the weight room that takes away from them excelling at their sport. So we just have to be smart, knowing what exercises yield what and what demands, what qualities we can develop in the weight room that might meet certain demands of certain sports. So just to end, we'll end on some clear examples. We'll go back to the easy offensive lineman versus baseball pitcher example. Now I know these are two kind of very different positions and there's very different skills required for each of these positions, but perfect example of why, if say we were absolutely told, gun to our head, we had to give each of these players a pressing, we'll go squatting and pressing movement in the weight room. Offensive lineman, I'm probably going to give a bench press, and I'm probably going to give a safety squat bar back squat for their pressing and their squatting movement, because the bench press is going to compress them front to back, kind of widen them out, create high amounts of force production, compressive and concentric muscle activity where they're reducing motion, creating kind of yielding more of a hypertrophic, bonus word for the day, response, both with the squatting movement and the bench press motion, which is what they need on the field. They need to be big, strong, and not be able to move. Pitcher, on the other hand, if I had to pick a pressing movement, gun to my head, I'd probably pick some sort of unilateral or kind of like reciprocal pressing exercise. That might be a dumbbell floor press and a glute bridge, where I can kind of create alternating compression and expansion on the backside and opposing sides as I press and reach, because they need sort of those that ability when they're pitching on the field. And if I kind of give more of a traditional barbell exercise or bilateral exercise, that might create too much compression front to back, where it kind of flattens them out, like I said, and they can no longer there's too much concentric muscle activity in certain places that there's not creating space for them to get back to that arm slot position. So they would need more kind of yielding capabilities and eccentric orientation changes in certain areas. For squatting activity, I would probably still give them a little bit of bilateral squatting, maybe safety squat bar, box squat where they have to yield at the bottom and completely unload the weight. I might give them where they're still kind of learning to create high amounts of force quickly, not necessarily like just adding more weight on the bar, but maybe working on moving the weight on the bar fast. Then I might even pair that with a box jump, again, just kind of promoting more kind of explosive capabilities that they might need. But I would also probably err more on unilateral squatting exercises as well, maybe a heel elevated split squat with a weight in the front rack, where you can kind of create more posterior expansion that might give them some more range of motion to continue to be able to hit the crazy arm slot position that they need to. But again, the bigger focus is make sure we're not creating adaptations that are going to take away from their sport. So at the end of the day, that is what strength training can possibly do. It can possibly create adaptations that restrict the development of certain qualities or certain positions that an athlete will need to excel at their sport. So we need to kind of not necessarily go to the other end of the spectrum where strength training is never harmful, it's always good, it's the best thing an athlete to do, to strength training very bad, it's going to be terrible. Maybe we need to find some sort of a middle ground and kind of look at things a little bit more realistically, and kind of embrace that strength training might not be, or certain types of strength training might not be the best thing for an athlete. And again, at the end of the day, mastering specific skills required in specific sports is going to get you better at the sport. Practice the sport more if you truly want to be great. That's all I have. See you next time. Toodaloo.